Hello everyone, welcome to the Homebuyer Online University. We're going over Class 1 today, and I'm here with Rebecca Murphy.
Class 1, 3 main goals.
So yeah, we're going to be going over 3 main goals, Rebecca, in this webinar, and a lot of homebuyers are real unclear, a little fuzzy on what to expect when they attend a homebuyer seminar or webinar or a class or a workshop, and or even when they're scouring the internet for useful information. You know, there's no framework, there's no structure to what they're looking to do. So I like to talk about 3 main goals that we want to accomplish in a webinar like this. The very first one is, the homebuyer is going to want to become familiar with the terms of the process. There's a whole nother language involved when you're looking for homes that the average person is just not going to be familiar with at any other time in their life. The second thing is going to be to get rid of fear. Fear actually keeps a lot of folks from stepping out and looking to purchase a home. A lot of folks will not even try just because of fear, and even if they do, a lot of times they'll get into the process and then back out, get cold feet, just because the process is so intimidating and so daunting. So we want to get rid of fear. And of course the third thing is we want to minimize surprises. Who likes to go through a process, come to the end, look for their dream home, and be ready to move in, and then have a nasty shock dropped on the table? We want to make sure that you're not going to closing with surprises awaiting you.
Class 1, you're not ready to buy until...
That is very correct, Rebecca. You're not ready to buy until, in my eyes, 5 things have happened with your knowledge base. The first is you've got to know where you want to live. The second thing is you've got to know what type of home you want. The third thing is you've got to know what you can afford. The fourth is you've got to know what you want to pay. And that's different to number 3. What you can afford, or what somebody tells you can afford, or what you're qualified for, isn't always the same as what you want to pay. And that's important that you make a distinction between the two. And the fifth thing is that you've got to know and understand all your loan options that are available to you. And in my mind, you're not ready to really step out and launch into the home buying process until you've got all 5 of these steps under your belt in your knowledge base.
Class 1, look, buy, own in 7 steps.
That is exactly right, Rebecca. Looking is not the same as buying, and buying is not the same as owning. And there's a sequence here. You've got to look first, go through the act of buying second, and then you own. And there's 7 very clear, distinct steps that you're going to have to follow that are pretty conclusive. And if you follow those 7 steps, you're going to wind up owning a home. The first is you've got to make the decision to buy. And you've got to know what your reasons are for wanting to buy. And we're going to talk about that here in just a moment. Second thing is you've got to assemble a team. Buying a home is a very scary process, especially if you try to do it by yourself. You've got to have some professionals that you put your faith in, that are recommended, that will be a part of your team that helps you get from point A to point Z. The third thing is you've got to get your home loan in place. That means that your financing has got to be intact before you ever get in the car to go look at a house. Your financing's got to be in place. Your home loan's got to be in place. Number 4 is that you've got to identify the homes that you like, which also means eliminating and ruling out the ones that you don't like. Number 5 is you've got to make offers on these homes, and of course we're going to be talking about what an offer is and what are some of the important things that go in an offer. Number 6 is you're going to do some due diligence, and that's doing some investigative work yourself, not just relying on third parties, but you yourself doing some things to investigate the home and make sure that there aren't any hidden issues. And of course the most exciting thing is to close, celebrate, and enjoy the fact that you are now a homeowner.
Class 1, step 1, make the decision to buy.
Make the decision to buy. I love that because none of this begins until you've persuaded yourself, Rebecca, inwardly that this is something you want to do. And you've got to know your reasons for wanting to buy a home. In my experience in doing this over the years, there are really 2 types of reasons. There's an emotional reason, and then of course there's a rational reason, and you really can't have one without the other. No one I know goes into a home and buys a home just because they feel like it. You've got to think it through. And then by the same token, I don't know a lot of people that buy it just because they crunch a bunch of numbers and think this is the right thing to do. There's got to be a mix of the 2.
Charles, what's the difference between an emotional and a rational reason?
Great question, Rebecca. An emotional reason basically is one that is not so calculated, I would say. Emotional reasons, when I think of that, Rebecca, I think of stuff like, kids playing outside and you feeling safe for them playing outside. You're familiar with the neighborhood. You're familiar with the kids that they're playing with. Thanksgiving dinners, we think about things like this. Christmas is around the tree, or decorating the place to make it look like something that's kind of a reflection of who you are, your taste. And these are the kinds of things that are not really rational. No one sits there and, figures that out on a laptop or a calculator. It's just what we want. It's a deep-seated emotional drive, if you would, that we have within ourselves, especially in this country, to own a home and call it your own. It's an achievement, and that's very different to talking about things like, equity build-up or messing around with a rent versus own calculator or talking to your tax guy about the tax benefits. In my mind, that's the rational side of buying a home.
What is a rent versus own calculator?
A rent versus own calculator, Rebecca, is basically a little calculator where you can punch in some figures and the system will tell you. The system will give you a set of numbers comparing what your total monthly or yearly outgo will be in renting versus buying a home. And here's an example. If you look on your screen, I'm going to go through this particular example right now.
So on the website, we go ahead and click on Rent versus Own. Brings up a pretty straightforward-looking calculator. You'll see here that you've got the current rent amount, purchase price, down payment amount, approximate interest rate. Let's go ahead and change that to maybe 5%. 30-year term, which is pretty common. How long you plan to stay in the home, so you can do a pretty good comparison. Click on the Calculate button, and you'll see over here on the right that there's a significant savings by owning a home, approximately $30,000. As opposed to renting. Let's change the current rent amount, bump that up to $1,200 a month, and see how that changes things. As you can see, if I change that to $1,200 a month in rent, the savings by owning a home compared to renting a home over a 7-year period is almost $49,000. Pretty significant. Now I'm going to go ahead and change the tax rate here to 1.5 and click on the Calculate button. Let's change the years in there. Say you're only going to be in the home for 5 years. Click again and see what happens here in terms of the total savings. Again, about $25,000 better off by owning a home compared to paying rent. And there's plenty of different scenarios and figures that you can put in here to help you come up with a rough idea of how much better off you are owning a home compared to renting.
As you just saw in that video, Rebecca, the benefits of actually owning a home, especially over the long term, are pretty significant compared to choosing to rent, as you saw in that calculator.
What kind of tax benefits are available for new homeowners?
The main benefit, Rebecca, is really being able to write off the interest that you pay on your mortgage. There are about 2 to 3 components of your regular monthly payment that are tax deductible. The mortgage interest is tax deductible. Your property taxes that you pay, that we all pay to the county that the property is in, that's tax deductible. And then, of course, mortgage insurance is tax deductible as well. So by and large, if you take a regular rent payment and compare it to an equivalent dollar amount as a house payment, you're coming out, light years ahead by making a house payment. Now, let's take a look at this quick little tax savings calculator that's on here that shows us some actual numbers. If you were to take an example rent payment and compare it to a similar house payment, you can see what happens.
The first thing we're going to do is go ahead and click on the interest tax savings calculator, and that brings us to this real simple looking calculator where you're going to go ahead and input your property value. I'm going to pick $150,000, nice round figure. Let's pick an easy loan amount of $100,000. Interest rate of say 5 1/8%. Over 30 years, which is pretty common. Say it cost a 0.1% to get that rate, for example, and we want to see what the savings are. Let's say after 6 years, we could put 10 years on there. There's also a box for the approximate property tax rate, because remember, that's going to be an out-of-pocket expense for you. And we also want to know what your income, your federal income tax rate is, based on which you are taxed for federal income. As soon as I click on Calculate, the system brings up a response. Now, here's a different example that I did earlier of a $200,000 property value, 180,000 loan amount, 5.5 rate, and you'll notice that we're looking at the savings over 10 years. And as you can see on the screen, the system tells you pretty quickly how significant the interest tax savings are, beginning with about $1,500 in the first year through to a total of about $12,000 that you'll save in tax savings over the 10-year period. Now, please understand, obviously this is not tax advice. All of these figures you need to go over with your tax preparer or your tax consultant. It's kind of a brief overview, but it gives you an idea based on your personal income tax rate and some parameters to do with the property, like the property value, loan amount that you're borrowing, the cost of getting that interest rate, the property tax rate, all these important parameters. Based on that, kind of gives you a rough idea how much you can expect to save by purchasing a home compared to renting, because obviously there are no tax interest savings on paying a rent payment.
So as you just saw in there, the tax benefits can be pretty considerable. I also want to talk about inheritance choices. You know, a lot of us think to ourselves, wow, 30, 40, 50 years from now or sooner, when we're ready to move on and what would we have to hand down to our children? You know, being able to hand a home down to your kids as an inheritance is a terrific thing, and being able to do that without that property having any encumbrance on it or a loan on it is an even more incredible thing. So you got to ask yourself, hey, you know, what will you leave behind? What other than your legacy, you know, what will you leave behind for your kids? Are you able to leave a property behind that's free and clear? And if that's the case, you've got to get on the home buying, you know, bandwagon right away.
Charles, how long does it typically take to pay off a home?
To pay a home off, you know, most loans that folks get these days, Rebecca, are 30-year mortgages, and, you know, every so often I see a 15-year term or a 20-year term, but most folks will have 30 years to pay the home off. Now, that doesn't mean you have to take the whole 30 years to pay the home off, because if you do, you're paying an awful amount of interest to the bank. If you strategize and plan ahead, there are a couple of ways to pay it off sooner. One is to use what's called a biweekly program. And with a biweekly program, you don't feel the pain of making additional payments. All you do is you take your regular monthly payment and cut it in half and send it in, you know, twice a month instead of sending in one payment per month. Now, by doing so, you can take, you know, you can shave off maybe 7-8 years off a 30-year term. The other way to do it, Rebecca, is actually, you know, make additional principal payments every so often as you can, when you can, and that'll chip away at that principal and enable you to pay the home off much sooner than a 30-year term.
What is a principal payment? Is that one of the terms you were talking about earlier that's important to know?
It is. A principal payment is actually a payment that's applied entirely to the balance of the loan. See, if you borrow $100,000 and let's say your principal and interest, for argument's sake, is, I don't know, $550, for example, if you were to make a $550 payment, that doesn't mean that all of that's going to chip away at that $100,000 balance. You might have, oh, I don't know, maybe, you know, $50 go towards chipping away at the balance, and the other $500 might be interest. And so over time, you're going to be paying more principal and less interest. At the beginning, you're going to pay more interest and less principal. But if you designate a payment and send it in as being entirely principal, then that has to go to the entire against the entire principal of the loan.